All right, we're cooking with gas here. You should see the welcome slide for the Power BI user group. Can I get a little confirmation from?
Looks good.
Okay, good. The agenda for today, we got a little bit of news and updates, next meeting and so forth. And then we'll have our raft of speakers. Our Toastmaster, Paul Van Dyke of Pro Ampac, will present on the calculate function and differences from sum and filtering. Emily Schmaltz of Plexus Corp has agreed to make a presentation on maximizing and innovating available report space. And I didn't change the slide for myself. I'm not doing text CSV by example. I did that last time. I'm showing a feature out of the November release of the Power BI desktop. And then Belinda Allen of Smith & Allen Consulting, Microsoft MVP, presenting on data modeling. So, without further ado, little announcement situation. I'm going to have a few of these throughout the slide deck, so like brace yourselves. Brace yourselves. All right, news and updates. The Power BI user group website is interesting in one respect, and that is, besides the fact that there's no membership dues, you can sign up for any of the Power BI user group meetings that are held across the world. Now, some of them, of course, will not be in the U.S., so the primary language will not be English. But if you're feeling adventurous, there are meetings going on in Europe all the time and in Australia. That link on this slide deck is live, and I'll be posting the slide deck after our meeting is over with. But you can attend any meeting you wish. There's no fee. You just need to sign up at the appropriate user group page on the Power BI user group website. So, for example, here is the home page for the Montreal Power BI user group, and they have an event coming up on December 10th. You can see the date down here in the.
Was that your French accent?
Are you? I can give you more. Découvrez les nouveaux types de données dynamiques dans Excel et Power BI.
Nice.
Be thankful I'm not talking like a pirate, okay?
You turned into the Pink Panther there at the end, Inspector Clouseau.
Yes, my favorite. Okay, so you get to a homepage for a Power BI user group, and it's in a foreign language. If you're using Chrome, as I am here, you just right-click on the page and choose Translate to English, and everything's translated to English. Not, of course, that will translate the meeting content to English if they're not speaking it, but you can look at these pages, and it's very convenient to have that translation. Our next meeting, Thursday, January 28th, from 2 to 5. We've been doing all our meetings from 2 to 5 online. We don't have a featured speaker as of yet, but we do like to have 3 or 4 members.
We actually do, Steve.
Oh,
Steve.
What did I
Marcus
miss?
Redu is presenting.
Marcus Redu from
it'd be great to have him back.
from Skyline.
Yes.
Okay. What's his? You have an idea what he's going to present on?
I believe it's some DAX and some entry level and some advanced features.
Oh,
kind of.
That's wonderful.
Kind of like for the whole group. So the
Dandy.
newbies and the more advanced people.
Yes, because we've had a number of comments that, it's nice to have the user group meetings, but it's over my head. So great, Marcus Redu. That'll be coming up, and we'll post that information on the Green Bay homepage on the Power BI user group website. All right, some new features. I like that baby. The Microsoft updates on YouTube. The links there are live. Shows the length of the updates, and they've got the new logo for Power BI here. There's always commentary from several people or groups of people that talk about the features. So you want a quick introduction. This lady is Ruth Pozuelo Martinez. Do you know her, Belinda?
I have not met her. I don't think I have.
Okay. She is
I don't think so.
she's another MVP. It's like with the Power Platform, there are more MVPs than you can shake a stick at.
Yes, and I am familiar with her videos. She's very good.
Yeah, she's very personable and
Hmm.
she distills things really well. This At the end of the November video, she talks or she links to another video of hers that's useful for explaining the differences between Power BI and Excel and about picking the right tool for the job. So I watched that video too. It's very illuminating because you don't want to treat everything like a hammer, whether you got Excel or Power BI. You ever run into that? Oh, great, Power BI. How about putting it in Excel? This group, this gang, it was a gang this time, 9 MVPs reacting to the November 2020 update. You see them all chortling here because this live update on YouTube, they really go to the edge when they're doing their broadcasts. There were a lot of technical issues, and the fellow in the lower right-hand corner is Mike Carlo. He is one of the 2 leaders of the Milwaukee Power BI user group. He's an MVP. He's doing all the technical stuff here. I think he was trying to run YouTube Live and a Teams meeting at the same time. Anyway, his laptop blue screened at about 47 minutes, and after they restarted, that's where everybody is chuckling here, and they're giving him they're having a bit of fun at Mike's expense. It's worth your time to watch if you're a more advanced Power BI user. All their names are there on the in the video. You have to kind of zoom in close to get to them, but since they're all MVPs, they all publish stuff. And there's been a number of other MVPs that have contributed to these monthly videos. So that I think is worth your time to watch. This was funny. During that blue screen period, Mike put this message on the screen, and I got a kick out of it because rather than saying experiencing technical issues, it uses the imperative mood, and so he's ordering you to experience technical issues. All right, then I've got the custom visuals. This has been changed by Gil Raviv. It used to be a separate PBIX file, but now it is only available as an app on the Power BI Custom Visuals website. And the link down here is the link to this site. The number of visuals now matches what Microsoft has posted. This is a very nice way to explore them. I think it's better than looking at the marketplace website for these things. So my recommendation. We're going to get to our first presentation, and I thought, Paul,
Nice.
that it would this would suit you.
Yep. Yeah.
All
I'm
right.
gonna be having that as part of my presentation. That's cool.
All
Good.
right. And here he is, Paul Van Dyke of ProAmpac, and this is the title that I came up with, which should be close to what you're talking about. So, Paul,
Yes, good.
if you wish to take it away and share your screen,
Will do. Thanks, Steve.
you're welcome.
So my mini presentation is related to the calculate function, and many thanks to Sarah Barnhill for working with me to say what's a good beginner question that we can get answered out here, and I was happy to kind of kick around my thoughts on this topic, which was the calculate function within DAX. Why is it different than some? What are some effective ways that it gets used? And as I researched it, it became clear that there were particular things and how it effectively did filtering and the use of the actual filter function of DAX. So you should be seeing on my screen a kind of breakdown. I've got several examples of the calculate function. And what I'll do is I'll run through kind of a high level of how it works. I have some editorial opinions on the use of this particular function. And then really, it's only 10 minutes. So these links to read more, I am going to pass along to Steve and post into the chat when I'm done, because I really recommend reading more, because calculate, as I got into it, sorry, Sarah, this really isn't a beginner's function, I don't think. So looking at this, the calculate basic layout looks like this, where it's calculate on an expression or a measure, and then you can have as many filters as you like. So that's represented in this second one here. You're calculating, in this case, average sales as a measure. If you had an expression here, you could put that in, and it's going to calculate average sales, which as a measure, it's probably an average being of its own, in its own formula. And then the first filter here, it's filtering by the calendar table where the day is Saturday. So that's an example of, you can see how the filter is laid out there. And that's the end. There aren't any more filters. And I threw in an editorial comment. It's great to kind of show you that you can add filters to the calculate function, something you can't do with sum, for example. But I think this is dumb. Don't ever really do this to get your Saturday sales as opposed to other kinds of sales. But it shows how that filter is really what's the power here of calculate, and differences between sum. Sum doesn't have any way to filter like this. The next example here is same thing. You can see two filters being passed in. So the second filter is obvious, but also notable in that the all DAX function is very helpful to use when using the calculate function, I found. Really, it helps clear away any of the other filtering that's going on when you want to do this measure. So what this example is basically saying is, show me calculate average sales when it's Saturday. Doesn't matter what filtering is happening on the calendar. So all calendar causes the filtering that's passed through to do this calculate to say all the calendar dates, everything in the calendar table. So it doesn't matter if there's other filtering happening on the calendar table. It's going to say, give me all of it. But as you pass through filters, the way the filtering passes through, think of it in terms of like a flow. So the first filter filters things down, and then it goes on to the next. So they will both apply because they are flowing in sequence. So it gets pretty complicated, but you might see the use of all as helpful when you're trying to say, I'm going to specifically try and make a calculate function that ignores whether there's any calendar filtering going on. You could use that all function. The next example here is shows a time intelligence based filtering that you could really get some use out of. This is a nice use case of the calculate. I'm saying I want to get total sales, and I want it for the same period last year as what is currently being selected in the report. So in this case, this same period last year is a time intelligence function that is being told, okay, well, whatever date is currently being in use in my Power BI report, whatever dates are currently selected, any thing that's going on, give me the same period last year and calculate the total sales. So this is a great way to say, I want a measure that is the same period last year's sales. And it's done with this time intelligence function passed as a filter to a calculate. This example here is showing the power of filter. So really, this up here, when I say never do this, it's dumb. I don't appreciate cases where people are just going to fill up the filters with simple filters like this, where it's like, where this equals this, and this equals this, and this equals this. Instead, do a little more reading and try to use this filter DAX function, because this is powerful. You'll get a very different result if you just fill up this filter bar with various filters versus using the filter function, because this filter reunifies them all together and causes it to filter correctly. Like if I did these two together, you're not going to get anything correctly because it's telling it to do Saturday, but yet ignore the calendar filtering. So down here, wrapping it in the filter function, if you go do some reading on it, I'm doing all calendar dates, no matter what was currently being filtered, but then I'm also doing things that are on a Saturday. This will get you some resemblance of some numbers, whereas this one will not. So the filter, I think, should be used just about every time you're going to consider using Calculate. And it's an important piece. Now, all that said, since I have the floor, and people can interject and disagree with me, and maybe people love DAX, I think the calculation function is complicated. It's hard to read and maintain over time. You could build out a bunch of these. People think they're clever and they're adding tons of filters. Maybe they're even using alls and filter criteria. If I come in as someone who is looking to maintain this after you, I think it's hard to read and follow through. One of the articles down here that I'm going to be posting is a great example of the kinds of frustrations I see when using the calculate function. I think it should be avoided. Personally, if I were to give advice to a beginning person and they were like, I'm learning Power BI, I'm trying to understand DAX and I want to do a few calculations, avoid the calculate function. Stick with basic sums, averages, work on your data model such that it will be much clearer that your measures are just a basic sum, no weird special filtering going on. And leave the filtering when someone's like, I really want to understand Saturday sales. Leave that in the Power BI visuals filtering or in the report. Don't overcomplicate your data model with weird DAX measures that are like, I really want to see Saturday sales as a separate measure in my model. That's my editorial opinion is I'm going to avoid the heck out of Calculate. These articles here will have some great other support. These two are really talking about the power and utility that are great to understand with Calculate. This one gets more into why Calculate is a pain in the butt. And there are other ways that are friendlier to your fellow teammates who are going to be working on these models with you. Any questions?
I like that calculate.
Yep. We'll post these into the chat now, and that's a little bit more about Calculate. Sarah, you got to unmute and tell me if I answered your question.
You did. You did.
Right.
And now I know why I hate that function, because
Yep.
I can't understand it when I read it. And now it at least makes a little bit more sense. That was my problem, is I couldn't understand what it was trying to do, and it seemed to be really messy.
Yeah.
Now I know why it's calculate.
You will love you will love this article here, so go check that out.
Thank you.
One of the things, Paul, if I might interject on
Sure.
Calculate, because I do use it pretty regularly, and you're spot on, because Alberto Ferrari and Marco Russo, those two guys from SQL BI, I've got some stuff from them in my presentation today as well. Everyone calls them the Italian guys, but Alberto always says DAX is easy, but it's not simple, and that's DAX. The calculate function is one of the big reasons why. And every time I quote it to him, he goes, "At least you're using your hands right," and so makes me feel a little better. So I probably shouldn't. I'm not the only one who does that imitates him. To him, but I'll probably be imitating Marco during my presentation as well. So one of the things that the calculate function is meant to do, it's meant to extend beyond the row filtering. And so if you think about it, everything you do in Power BI, whether you're just pulling an existing table or existing field in, like a table visual, let's say, or you're creating a DAX measure where you're just summing up numbers, you always have what's called row filtering that it's going to be doing. So whatever that row represents, if that row represents a particular customer, the row filtering is that's going to occur is the customer. And one of the big things that Calculate does is it allows you to extend beyond that row filtering. And that's one of the purposes of it. You are spot on, Paul, that more often than not, there's a way to get around it if you're not comfortable with it. Absolutely. And that's probably a very smart thing. One of the things that I use calculate a lot for is I do a lot of financial reporting, operational financial reporting. And let's say assets, for example, I might go through and say, all right, create a measure where it ignores the row filtering and instead looks at the type of account it is. Is it an asset? And if it is, I want to include it. And that's how that filtering would work. And it works a little bit easier than just a straight out filter. And so that's kind of like the thought behind Calculate.
Yeah, that's fair. The
Mhm.
thing that I challenge and I'd want to be thinking about as a longtime, BI practitioner is what are we doing when we create a measure like that rather than leaving it in the hands of the report user to say, I want to filter by asset type. And
Mhm.
they have the power with Power BI to personalize their visuals, and all that can be done, and leave that filtering in their hands rather than force your model to have all sorts of weird complex measures that they can't edit and they don't understand how it works.
Right.
So,
And more often than not, they would do that. But the reason it wouldn't work for me is I like to have the assets, the liabilities, the equity, all of these different measures that I'm creating in the same visual. So you cannot apply a filter to a specific field in a visual.
sure.
So I have to use Calculate to go beyond that row formatting. So I absolutely agree. If it's something you're not comfortable with, because it can be complicated and you don't want to end up with incorrect data, by all means, figure out a way around it. Be a little more creative with your visual. Instead of having one visual with assets, liabilities, and equity, have 3 separate little mini visuals that show you that same information. And it works well to do that. So
And this article too proposes an idea that, yes, if you're going to be doing such things in your model, you want to create many measures like that, put them on the same visual. This one proposes understanding a bit more about variables and makes for a much more readable experience for your DAX. So I like that one. So another plug for reading this one when I posted in the chat.
yeah.
Sorry guys, that was way beyond 10 minutes, but I really
Cool.
appreciate the feedback and everybody jumping in.
That was 2 minutes beyond the 10 minutes, Paul. So
Was it?
I'll give you.
All right.
You could take it away from me since I caused the problem.
All right. So,
Sure thing.
all right. So we had handsome Paul, and I like that suit. That kind of loungewear. I do. I don't recognize the movie, but here we are. All right. Emily Schmaltz from Plexus Corp is our next presenter and has I think, a very intriguing topic to talk about. Emily, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
We sure can. So
Awesome.
you may take it away and share your screen.
Okay. This is my first time on Teams, so I hope I don't shut my screen down.
Oh,
And I believe your previous picture was Jeremy Jam, the councilman from Parks and Rec. I could be wrong,
thank you.
but if you've ever seen Parks and Rec,
I think you're right, Emily.
I kind of wanted to talk today about some Power BI design ideas, particularly how things have changed since the inception of Power BI. And if I may, I'm going to air a little bit of Plexus dirty laundry here. So I'm going to show you some of our earliest and oldest reports. Now, Plexus has had Power BI pretty much since its inception, so we kind of have the benefit of seeing the entire evolution for the last 5 years or so. And the drawback is some of our oldest content is still out there months and years after they've released new features that address some of our most dogged problems. So some of our oldest reports here are really primitive and very ugly. You can see this one here has some slices over here. We've tried to jam a whole bunch of stuff over here to try to keep it out of the way, but that is a little bit complicated and sticky. We got some lines and stuff here, a lot of data going on down here. So this one could probably use a revisit, and there's a lot of tools here that could make a better layout here and a better way to cram some information in here that isn't too overwhelming. This is probably one of our worst offenders, so we kind of use this as our flagship example of what not to do. Of sprinkling in some slicers in the middle of your content, and having a mix of drop downs and these, which you can't search in here right now, and all kinds of stuff here. And then really all your returns are down here, and they're just tables. So this is like strictly text-based information, which for this team that's looking for defects in our manufacturing production, and this is old data, once they finally plug in all the right combination of stuff here, they might get exactly what they're looking for, but it's all just like numbers based, and once you know your number, what are you going to do with that information, right? So it's very hard to navigate and to derive any information from. So I came up with a demo here that kind of has, now I will admit I didn't build this, I kind of took a report existing off of the Power BI gallery and built off of it, but you can see here I really liked the layout here with some very prominent KPIs and a trend over time, so you can kind of see what's going on here. They did a really cool thing here where they're playing with the button and bookmark feature, so you can, it looks ostensibly like you're switching, but it's actually two different visuals, so you're switching between sales and profit, and you can see those over time. And we got some nice visuals here with the location and the type and stuff, so I just thought this was really cool. And I wanted to branch out a little bit and show some ideas I've seen recently. So one of them is the concept of hiding your slicers out of the way. So I made a slicer pane on here, and you can see when I open this up, now my slicers pop up, and I can do things like filter a country. Let's pick Albania. What's going on in Albania? Quite a bit, actually. So I can close this out and then look at my Albanian sales and everything here and see everything kind of filter, and then this map does the cool filtering and everything. So that kind of keeps us out of this business of cramming half of the workable space with slicers. You can just kind of tuck them out of the way, and I can show how I did that in a minute. And then I put a reset button here too, so we can get Albania out of there and close this. So that was the filter pane, the slicer pane. Another thing I wanted to highlight was a new feature that we've really enjoyed so far, which is turning on the personalized visuals. They put this in preview, I believe, a few months ago, and I think they just went generally available with it, so now it's good to go. But we really love this because some of our reports turn out to be just duplicates, so you have kind of the way this is sort of the same concept, and you can flip between these. We would have visuals that would be by product, by country, by time, by this, by that, and it's really like a 4-up or a 6-up chart of the same bar chart, but just with different things on the x-axis, where you could save a lot of room by having one chart and allowing people to flip through or change it on their whim if they want to. So let's say this map isn't speaking to me at all. I could change it to, let's say, a clustered column chart. And now this kind of makes more sense to me. Rather than bubbles, I can see some hard concrete data here that's showing me sales by city. And I could also, let's say, I could change the measure. I could change the thing on the axis. So maybe I'm not really liking this, or maybe I need a little more granularity here. So I'm going to look at region instead. I'll click on region. We'll get rid of city. I could have left city there. I could drill down too. But now I can see these by region, and I could pick, because I don't have region anywhere else here. So now I can see if I click on region, now now my countries are filtering and everything. So I can do some cool stuff just by changing these visuals, and you enable people to do a lot of stuff on their own versus coming back to you and saying, I don't like this bar chart. Can you make it this? Or can you make me my own specific report
and bookmark that?
Yes, and you can make bookmarks out of these too, and kind of make almost a tailored view of your own stuff versus this. Part of the reason this has so many slicers is because when people are looking at defects, they all have their own particular reason to look at defects, either by defect code or by package or by date or by customer. So by cramming all these slicers in here, we're trying to meet everybody's needs, but obviously that kind of creates a lot of clutter. So by doing things like these, you can kind of allow people to do those sorts of things without cluttering up their visual. Now the last thing I wanted to show was using drill throughs. So this is another thing we've really enjoyed. a lot of our reports used to have, I don't have a page panel on here, but you've probably seen some reports where it's like page after page after page after page, and we have some reports that have 10 to 20 pages in there because there's just so many people that are going to have a specific reason to look at this. So between the specific slicers and personalizing, you can also just create either a couple different pages or even a couple different reports, and maybe make your main report like a dashboard that has like all the high points and all the either higher level, executive level, whomever stuff that you want to see. And then when you drill through, you can actually drill through to your specific report. So right now I'm looking at kind of an overall view of sales and profit. I could either drill through, I created a drill through for sales analysis. Now this is actually a different page that's hidden within the same report. So this is in the same report as my page I just drilled off of, but you can see after I click through on United States, now I have filtered my sales analysis page, which is really just a copy of the other one. But just for this purpose, it's a sales page, and it has United States data here. You can see these are my top cities in the United States with sales. If I go back, I can also pick on a different report. So if I click on Australia and I drill through, this profit analysis is actually a different report. So let's say I have an entirely different report that is addressing profit things, and by passing some filters from my main dashboard, such as Australia, I can get a lot more detail here through, a really in-depth profit report. And since my filter is stuck, I can focus on just my view of the world. And then I don't even necessarily need any slicers here. If I want to, I can change the filter. Otherwise, I presumably came here from a place of a very specific view in mind to begin with, right? My Australia focus. So let's see, how many minutes do I have? 3 minutes. Okay. So, and I can provide some links too, like Paul did, but just in general, I got many of these ideas from YouTube videos and stuff. I mean, if I just Google slicer panel, I've got plenty of ideas here. I tend to gravitate towards the newer tutorials, because I don't know if you guys have noticed that there's Power BI advice dating back to 2015 or 2016, and a lot of it can be out of date and not helpful. Even something as recent as 2018 might be talking about features that aren't necessarily helpful, or that they've created something new. So I try to address newer stuff. And then same thing with the drill throughs. You can create a drill through. These guys in a cube are very helpful. And then the personalized visuals, those are easy because that doesn't really require any fancy footwork or bookmarks. That's just turning on a setting. So that's pretty helpful. But I can go behind the scenes real quick and show you. So if you want to turn on the drill through, all you got to do is pop this open and make sure that you have your cross report and your drilling turned on. And then you can throw some fields in here that you can drill on. So since I have category, I could drill through from here and say right click and then drill from furniture, because that's my category. Or I could do like the cities or the countries that I have filtered on, or even the measure. So if I have sales and I want to go to my sales data from one of my sales measures, when I'm in the service, drill through will be available here. Personalized visuals, you've got to turn that on out in your settings, but it's kind of like just it's just a push button setting. So once it's on, it's on. Down here, so I'm in the report settings, allow report readers to personalize visuals to suit their needs. Flip that on, and then you're good. And you can also turn it on and off per visual. So let's say you don't want people messing with this bar chart. You say this is what it is, leave it alone. You can turn this off in the visual header setting. Down here. And then you get 2 scroll bars, which is very confusing, but you get your personalized visuals fixed. There it is, down at the bottom. The filter pane required a little more footwork. That plays some games with bookmarks and buttons and stuff, but functionally what I'm doing is I'm creating a bookmark. I'm creating a bookmark with this open and linking it to my little hamburger menu, and then I'm creating a bookmark with it closed and then linking it to my close button here, and then making sure I create a bookmark with my, now it doesn't want to close when I'm showing it off. And then making a bookmark that links to reset all my slicers. So, and then you're just kind of like playing games with buttons and layers. And I want to highlight one more feature before I'm done, because this is brand new. Well, maybe it's frozen. Well, at any rate, This toggle button is new. I think it's only a month or two old, but it's called Maintain Layer Order, and this is kind of important to turn, if you do play a game like this where you're going to be putting visuals on top of visuals, to turn this on, because I don't know if you saw when I selected this table before, and now it doesn't want to do it for me. When I selected this table before, the table was actually laying over this, and if you select something behind this, it'll just want to pop out. So you want to make sure that you turn that layer order on so that if I click on this slicer, it's always going to be ahead of this, because in my visual layering here, it's always ahead, you know. So, but you can find more things about those if you just Google them. I can provide the particular links that I use to do these, but they're pretty straightforward. So, I hope that gives you guys some ideas about using your space more wisely and not falling into pitfalls like this where you're trying to make everybody happy and then you make nobody happy. I'd like to know, does anybody have any questions or any thoughts on this process? Or these are new features since the inception of Power BI, and I think they help us a lot to maximizing your usable space.
That was very good, Emily. The personalized visuals, what kind of support does that cause for the IT staff? It's something that I think is very cool, but we have a very limited amount of support, and I'm afraid it would cause a lot of questions coming our way. Have you dealt with any of that, or is it simple enough for them to use?
I think, yeah, we're kind of on the same page too. We're a little bit cautious about rolling it out whole cloth yet, because some people could do some really stupid things, to be honest, and you could throw in some values. Say, like, this example doesn't have one of our cubes connected, but we do have some cubes with a lot of measures and stuff, and some people could throw in two things that aren't related and then create a big cross join and like bring down the server. So we don't want people to hurt themselves. I wish we could just limit it to like the things we feel are safe. Like, sure, go ahead, change the map to a column chart. Go nuts. Change the axis. I don't care, but just don't put these measures in. So for right now, we're being a little conservative. I think we might limit it to places where to maybe apps where we feel the users are a little more savvy, or to visuals that kind of lend themselves better to that, or to cubes that have a low risk of doing bad things because all the data is related or something like that. So we have been a little conservative in rolling that out so far.
Those are good ideas, because the same kind of thing crosses my mind. What I've planned to propose on our side is to have a separate page that is on many reports where they might be in an audience that would personalize, and that separate page starts to follow a pattern where we call it the personalization playground.
Yeah, sandbox is what we call it.
Yeah, or sandbox. Yep. And then if we put that and it's clear that they're in a personalized area separate, we can keep them from messing with the main report, causing confusion, that kind of thing is what my idea was.
Yeah, and we kind of like to emphasize that the reports that we have in our Power BI environment have been blessed, so to speak, by corporate BI. So you can say that the report, as you see it, is the one that is ordained. So if you do anything personalized, you kind of do it at your own risk, and it doesn't necessarily reflect reality, right? So if you do bring in some sales or something and you got some goofy filter, and you did it yourself, don't go like making big decisions on behalf of the company just because you made, so it's kind of like what you see in the Power BI is what you get. If you do anything, it's at your own risk. So just make sure you understand fully what you're up to.
And then point them to the reset to default button.
Yes.
Yep, you can always reset. I like showing people this because there's some people that are so scared of Power BI, they think if they like click on something, it's going to actually like right back to the database and make changes. I'm like, no, you guys aren't that powerful, but you can't break anything out here, but you can break things. It's kind of hard to explain.
There's a good question in the chat from Ben where he's saying, is there a way to understand the usage behavior so that we can tell if people are personalizing, so that we can get some sense of whether people are making use of it or causing themselves confusion because they aren't using what's been given to them? I could see that. And I don't know if anyone else has any better information, but I monitor our tenant quite a bit. I see logs. We can't even tell what page people are looking at in a report. So no, we don't really have a good sense of who's, I would expect we're not going to have a good sense of who's using the personalization feature.
Yeah, I can actually go into that. So we are using, oh goodness, where is it? We actually have a usage thing out here that we publish to people that they can go ahead and see, because we have app owners that like to see how many people are in their apps. And we're using PowerShell to scrape the usage logs. And so it kind of depends on, let's reset this because I'm sure I was doing something weird last time. It kind of depends on what the event is, I think. No, that's the, no, what are these? Oh,
You're able to tell what pages they're hitting?
no, we can't tell what page they're in, but sometimes you can tell what kind of activity it is. I can't remember what it's called. Consumption method, event. I think maybe if I drill down in here, there's some things where it can be like I published it. I published a report. I published my own personal gateway. There's some things like that where we can kind of tell if they're doing something bad. I don't know. I can't remember, but I know it's in these. It's somewhere in the usage, so you'll have to look it up. But I do know. I don't. So and those things have changed too. They've made it better. So eventually maybe we'll get some more granularity to that, but
good to know.
Yeah, I would like to see those things. I mean, I would like to see, I mean, other than that, you'll get tickets of I don't understand my own report.
You might.
Yeah. So yeah, to answer that question, no, there's not a great way to see particularly what people are doing. It's logged as an event by like visiting the site, basically.
Okay.
Any other questions? Put them in the chat or unmute now. All right.
Cool.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Emily. That was very nice. There we go. Okay. You see
Now we got it.
Emily's pretty face.
Yes.
And then
That's an old picture. It's nice and young.
and then this non-pretty face. I feel like this a lot. I should not have said that. All right. The new model view and list view. These were part of the November desktop release. It isn't something that is this overwhelming thing, but it's yet another example of the constant little improvements that they do in the desktop interface. So, changes to the list views. Here I'm looking at a data model, and there's one of the lists there, one of the table objects in the model. And over on the right, you see some of the new icons that there are for measures and dates, the numeric fields. They're a little clearer. They've done a nice job on setting those up, but they don't just pop in because you download the November update. To see them, you need to go into File, Options and Settings, Options, and Preview Features. And right here at the bottom is the new feature, the new field list. And then you'll have to restart Power BI for that to be invoked. But then from that point forward, you don't have to worry about it. The new list style shows up everywhere. When you open up a model view in the November update, you'll see this prompt right here underneath the ribbon. Upgrade to the new model view for an improved design. All right, and the change is permanent, and it does not require a restart. As soon as you click the Upgrade Now button, boom, you've got the new model view. So it has a few new features compared to the old. You can see here one of the first ones is that collapse button, and this is what it looks like once you've clicked the collapse buttons on each one of these table objects. In my case, I tell it to show me the keys, leave the keys visible. Then one of the nice things is it just makes for a more compact data model. You don't have to show every single field just because they're there. The model view is more for the relationships. How do the tables talk to each other? The table headers show more information. You can turn on the option for giving you this little tooltip, which shows the storage mode and the last time it was refreshed. The storage mode, import or direct query or dual mode. There's one more, and I think I've got that on the next page. Yes, these are the icons that appear on the table headers for each of the different types of storage. So import direct query, a live connected source, and then the dual mode, both import and direct query. And you can change the properties of the table cards to group the key fields together at the top, because there's plenty of tables with the key fields scattered all over the joint. On the left is the normal sequence of fields that are in that particular table, and on the right the key fields are clustered at the top. In this case it's these three: customer number, date, and item number, and it moves everything else below. And then when you collapse this particular table view, then all you'll see will be the key fields. The options that you have for displaying the table card properties, just make sure that you don't have any of the tables selected in your data model, and then you can expand the properties. So there's three options. I've turned them all on. Pinning the key fields on the top of the card. That's the three fields I showed you. The key fields had floated to the top, and show the key field when the card is collapsed. Show the database in the header when applicable. I've got it turned on to yes. I haven't seen it yet. I've only used this for a very short time, because when did that release come out, Belinda? Was that a week ago, maybe a little over a week ago?
Yeah, it's maybe been that, yeah, and some of it's been in preview a little longer, so I'm not sure. It's some of the pieces, but I think this came out about a week ago.
Right. I will say that that lady that does the 7 and 9 minute updates of the new releases, she said that the November release is her favorite release of the entire year. There's all kinds of little improvements in usability that are part of the release. So it's, I think, worth it to check out the videos that go over that, as well as the Microsoft summaries. We forget this sometimes. All right. We're going to go on to our featured speaker, Belinda Allen, who visited us in August of last year and made a presentation on the more on the Power Platform, and she's going to do on data modeling today, and has been gracious enough to grant us the time today. So Belinda, you may take it away.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. Can you see Power BI?
It is coming up, and there it is. All right.
Okay, great. I'm going to go to my slide deck now. I'll start out with the real slideshow. You know me, before it's all over, I'll just have good old PowerPoint listed up there. So first of all, and forgive me for looking over to the side, I've got multiple monitors going on. Thank you for giving me a particular topic of interest, because it's been exciting for me preparing this for you guys. So I presented on a lot of this information in a whole different avenue, but being able to put this all together into data modeling, it has been just really very, very cool. So I have quite a few slides. I'll put the link in the chat momentarily. Actually, let me go ahead and do that really quickly. I meant to do that earlier. And let's see. I've got everybody on my all together mode. I don't know if you guys could see that on the screen, but it's fun.
I use that too.
Yeah, it's fun. And you know what's really cool is people don't change their seats, which I find is really kind of interesting. It keeps people in the same spot. Also, while I'm at it, if I could find the link again. Let's see. I have here we go. I have, I never sent that. There is the slide deck. And then also I'm putting in a link to a Microsoft form questionnaire. You could fill that out later. So you get a lot of the information without having to connect to me. But if you have anything you want to ask for, anything you want to ask in general, by all means, if you have a blog idea you're interested in, or if you have an idea you want Microsoft to implement, I'll submit it to ideas for you, whatever you want. You have just a little easy way to reach out to me. So we're going to be talking about data modeling inside of Power BI. So this is me. I'm going to just skip through that. Oh, by the way, I double checked. Bravo. Your Packers are doing well in this weird year. So that's good. Just wanted to applaud you guys for that. All right. So I have lots of demos. I have basically one big in-depth demo, but this is what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be looking at why data modeling, and then we're going to get into best practices. And this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time. And this is where we're also going to do the big data modeling. We're going to look at optimizing dates a little bit and how handling dates in different ways can affect your data model itself. And we have a demo with that. Linking in relationships, I'm going to show you a little bit about that. We'll probably have a little demo there as well. Actually, I'm sure we will. And then I just have a couple slides for optimizing DAX, some resources for that, but Paul scared me off showing too much of that with you guys. So just kidding. And then I have my soapbox of, well, actually the last couple of weeks that I would like to share with you guys. So we'll start out with why data modeling. And Steve, if you could give me like a 15 minutes before the end, I know how fast to start speeding up my my talking.
No, that's okay, Belinda. We have a time slot through 5, so you want to go over a little over an hour. That's fine.
Okay. All right. Cool. So I want to talk about why data modeling. Why are we modeling data? First of all, maybe you have a situation where your refreshing is taking what you consider to be too long. Maybe you're having a problem with the database size that you have, or maybe it's just flat out not optimized for reporting or filtering or grouping or any kind of aggregations. Maybe it's just not easy for your users to find what they're looking for if they're doing any kind of self-service BI. And these are some of the different things that I want to talk about. And if you don't do the data modeling right, you're going to feel a lot like, I did not know you were doing movie memes. That was kind of funny. But you're going to feel a little bit like Clark Griswold trying to undo the string of lights, because all of these are so intertwined and intermeshed with each other that it's really very difficult to separate them into different categories. So we're going to go through and spend the bulk of our time talking about some data modeling best practices. And you guys might already know some of these things. So hopefully if I could just give you one or two new things to think about, then I will have done my job today. And the first one is probably one of the most important ones, and it's avoiding a wide table. And by wide, I mean something with a whole lot of columns to it. You really want to keep your tables or your queries, I'm going to use that terms interchangeably. You want to keep them as narrow as possible for a lot of different reasons. First of all, it could take longer to read the data or refresh the data. You want to keep that in mind. And also, you're going to end up probably with a lot of duplicated data. And you might not even think about that. And I'm going to go through a live example. We're going to actually do some data modeling on one crazy GP view, SQL view. It doesn't matter what it is, though. You'll get the gist of it. And then also, if you have this one big wide table, you're not going to be optimized for some of the AI visuals that are built into the Power BI desktop. Some of the cool things like Q&A or the decomposition tree or the key influencers. You're not going to be optimized for those things. So you're not going to get as much information out of it just by simply of how your data appears. As we continue, when you're doing some of your best practicing, you always want to look once you get your data in, check your relationships, add any missing relationships. Also part of data modeling, you want to rename tables and you want to rename columns. And I can't stress this enough because I always tell people, build your data model for the most technologically challenged person in the company. I used to say the stupidest person in the company, and I'm still okay with that. But then I watched too much Match Game and I started using Dumb Dora, and then I started worrying that maybe there's a Dora at my session and she's freaking out. So often when I talk about the technologically challenged person, being a grandma, I'll frequently say grandma because I don't consider myself technologically challenged. But you want to build it something that's easy for them. You want to use spaces in the fields like customer space summary, not customer summary, all one word. And particularly because in a Q&A scenario, you're going to be typing things like show customer in New York versus show customer summaries in New York. So you want it to be something that's going to make sense. Another example would be if you have an employee table versus a consultant table and you call them consultants, then you want to make sure that you change the words to fit your tribal language. So you could see consultants and not just employees. Because if someone is using a Q&A or they're looking through a list of data, employees might not make sense to them if you're looking at project information, for example. You might want to see consultants instead. And you want to make sure all your data types are correct. And that would include something like in the year, not summarizing the year so that it doesn't try to sum it up at the bottom. When you check your data types in the query the query editor, and we're going to be talking about this specifically in a little more in depth, you want to make sure that the data type is right because that's how that column is going to act and react, not how it's going to appear. So we need to be very careful that we type those things in right, particularly because of DAX. And again, I'm saying the dirty word of the day, it seems like, but I love DAX. DAX has the ability to do what's called overloading, operator overloading, which means if you have two numbers, you have the number 3 in one column and 4 in another column, and you have those set as numerical and you try to concatenate them together, it'll do it. You'll end up with 34, right? Because it's going to go, oh, if you're concatenating, these must be strings. I don't care how the data type is set. I'm going to override it and make them strings so I can concatenate them. And the same would be true if they happen to be text and you use the add operator. It would end up with 7, even though they're a set of strings. Now, that might sound okay, but that kind of operator overloading, it's a little hard on your data refreshing and your data calculation. So it could cause some processor time, excess processor time. It could kill your speed, actually, if you have a lot of data. So you want to be careful about doing some things like that. Also, we want to make sure that we have a data category set up for all of our dates and our geographical columns. And particularly by that, I mean, for geography columns, go through and set them up as geographies. If it happens to be a URL, set it to a URL so it'll work like a URL instead of one big giant string. So you want to set those data categories right. For date, you want to make sure that you are using date and not using date time. We'll talk more about why that is in a moment. And you're going to want to, obviously, for visual purposes, change the format so that it won't give you the full date. But you want to set those data categories. And if you guys have questions about where those are, you could just come off mute and ask me, or any questions you have during the course of this, put it in the chat. And someone who is not afraid to do what?
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on it for you, yeah.
Thank you. I was going to suggest that. Yeah, just interrupt me and we'll go through and ask about them. Also, you want to make sure that you have some sort columns in for some things. For example, months. You probably want to go ahead and sort the month by the month numbers so that when you use them, let's say, on access in a clustered column chart, they're going to sort chronologically instead of alphabetically. So that's something else that you're going to want to do. And then you could just hide that sort option. Sometimes you're going to need to normalize data. So let's talk about normalizing data. And sometimes you're going to need to denormalize data. But in this situation, when we're talking about normalizing data, we're talking about each unique thing that people are asking about be set up as a separate query or table. For example, sales might be in one table, customers in another, salesperson in a third. So that's one example of denormalizing data. And then if you have multi-column entities, you might need to create an additional table yourself so that you can make them all individual tables. So, in this case, I have if all three sales, customers, and contacts are in a single query, we probably want to split them up. And we're going to be doing this in our live example in just a few moments. And then a union to eliminate portioning. I'll show you some specific examples of that. And so let's go ahead and talk about that, the portioning. So let's say you have data that looks like this. So you have a book tour. So you have a tour number, you have a book name, you have an author, and then you have a column for each city that they're going to. Well, the problem with this is we have portioned our cities that they're going to attend in 3 separate columns. So we would need to normalize the data by taking the cities out and making the cities separate. So we would have a tour number in a city for every one of those cities. And then we're going to actually end up with 2 separate queries, but it's going to function significantly better. And because especially AI and the query editor are going to be able to figure out, hey, which city field do I use? And that technologically challenged grandma is going to be able to know which city field to use because there's only going to be one. So this is an example of eliminating what we call portioning. Another thing that we want to do is eliminate property bags if you happen to have those in your data set. Now, a property bag is going to be just like what you see on the left. So we have for every customer and every field, we have a separate row of data. And this is horrendous. I'm sure all of you are sitting there thinking, I never have anything like that. But chances are the more Power BI you do, the more you're going to come up with some data set that has property bags. So what we need to do for these property bags is we need to change it so that our data has one customer record on one entire line. And in this case, this is exactly what we did. We pivoted the data so that we could eliminate these property bags, and it creates a much better scenario for us. And sometimes that also might mean creating multiple accounts. Then sometimes we want to split columns. So in this particular case, we have customers and we have the full address in a field. Well, this is great, depending on what you want to do. But if you want to maybe compare sales for London versus sales for New York versus sales for Green Bay, then you're going to need to have a column that just looks at the city. So sometimes we need to split these up. Now, that's not to say you want to remove the column with the full address. Maybe there's some advantage for you having that. Not sure about that. I'll leave that up to you. But you definitely want to be able to split the column so that you have a way that you could look at each of those fields individually. And especially if you're going to change the category for the geography to reflect a particular country or city or address, or even sometimes, depending on what country it is, you might need to use place. And so by doing that, you now have the capability of setting this up, and you can better take advantage of visuals like the map visual. And this is also true of longitude and latitude. You'd still want to split that as well if that happened to be in the same data. As we continue on the normalizing effect, for this multi-value column that we looked at, in this particular case, we have an ID, a name, a genre, and then we might have one or more composer listed for each one. So the composers are showing up as basically this multi-value column, and this is really no good. We would want to separate it so that we have a single composer for every line, because the what we're talking about for that query is the composer. And it's hard to go in and find everything that Wolfgang Mozart would be part of, because sometimes he might be the first composer listed, or the next you'd have to really do things by contain, and it's going to become very, very difficult for you, and you're going to have to get into a lot of those calculates functions in DAX if you want to really just go through and say, show me everything that Paul McCartney is related to. All right, so that's a little bit about that. Then we occasionally have the need to denormalize our data. And basically, we're going to be creating a new single table so we could have relationships. And I do want to point out that if you're using Q&A, Q&A can only read across active relationships. And I'm sure you've noticed when you're setting up relationships, sometimes you'll have an inactive relationship. And the reason why it allows us to have an inactive relationship is because the dirty word DAX will allow us to create measures that go across inactive relationships. You can call on an inactive relationship utilizing DAX. And we're not going to do DAX today. I wasn't planning on it before Paul's very good session, but we're not getting into, it was very good, but we're not getting into DAX today. But you can call on an inactive relationship, and that's the reason why we have that. Now, in this particular example, we have flights and we have airports. And when we're flying, we all know we start at one airport and we end up at another airport. So if you just have like a departure airport and arrival airport and you try to put all your airports in, that's not going to work for us, even though we're typically trying to say, don't, keep your queries as narrow as possible. That's not going to work for us. We're going to have to make it have the name of the arrival airport and have the name of the departure airport. Or we're going to have two queries for airports. Those are our two options. One query for departure airports and one query for arrival airports. So those are the two options that we have as far as denormalizing our data. Now, once we do all of these things and we break them into separate ones, this is really called dimensional modeling. And this is what most people do when they use Power BI. They typically go for this form of dimensional modeling, also known as a star schema. And in this particular case, it just so happens that there are 5 points to the stars. So in the middle, we have what they call the fact table, which is the sales table. And you can see there are 2 primary keys at the top, one for the sales order and one for the sales order line number. Usually, for those of you who don't work with sales information, the sales order itself is everything at the top and the bottom of the invoice, and each individual line would typically be something unique, and it has a unique number to keep track of it. Now, if you look on the left, we have the sales territory, we have the product dimension, we have the date dimension. All of these dimensions around the edge, these kind of help give us lookup tables for our data. And I'm going to get into why these are such a big deal. And I also want to point out, and I've mentioned this already, changing the name of columns and tables to make it easier on grandma. A lot of people I've noticed will put dim for the dimension tables and fact for the fact tables at the beginning. And I do not like this. I find that makes it very difficult for end users to figure out, to do any kind of exploration on their own. And I think if you do the data modeling easy enough, then you could definitely do that. You could let some people have some opportunity to do some exploring on their own of data. I would keep the fact and the dimension out. They don't need to know about that. And for the ones where you have the link going to, I would hide the link on one of the edges so that you don't have, for example, employee key and employee key. You don't have them listed in the same spot. Let me see if I can drag this up. You don't have them then listed in the same spot. And so you don't have that grandma saying, which employee key do I use? Perhaps hide it in here in the fact table. So it'll make sense. Oh, when I want anything on employee information, I'm going to go to the employee table. We're not going to call it the dim employee, just the employee. All right. Now, when you're doing a star schema, again, the fact table is the one that contains the facts. And typically they're going to say a fact table will grow longer or taller in nature, because as you add things like sales invoices or purchase orders, they're just going to keep making that table longer and longer, meaning there are more and more rows. Unlike dimension tables that basically are the who, what, where, how, and when on the fact table. So there are all the details on the fact table. And a lot of people will explain these tend to grow wider in nature. And why would they grow wider in nature? Well, perhaps if we're looking at sales invoices, one of our dimension tables would be customers. And forgive me, I'm writing with my mouse. Okay, so we have customers over here, and maybe we have the ID, and then we have the name, and maybe that's all we have. Well, now I want to say, oh, you know what else? I want to get the customer balance. So I'm going to get, and I don't know what, that's actually a dollar sign. You guys could laugh if you want. I'm going to add that in. So basically, I'm making the customer dimension table wider because I'm adding more rows across. That's not to say that I'm not going to add new customers to the list, because hopefully I will be, but that's basically how it's going to remain there. Okay, so let me find my mouse again. I lost my mouse. There we go. Okay. And then it brings me back to, I have what I call Belinda's 3 rules of query editor. And the first one I've talked about already in detail. I just talked about that, and that's renaming the query to something that makes sense, that describes what it is to make it easier for grandma, especially if you're accessing tables in a database. But the second rule is removing all unnecessary columns. And I recommend you use choose columns rather than just highlighting columns and then right mouse clicking and choosing remove. If you use the choose column icon, and I'll be using that in our example in just a few minutes, you always have the ability to go back and add columns. So you could be real aggressive on removing columns. If you think you do not need it, don't include it. It's too easy to go back and add it in later. Keep it out of there because you don't want to have excess columns. You want to keep the fields, the number of fields or the number of columns as small as possible. The next thing that is Belinda's 3rd rule, if I could find my mouse again, there we go. It's hard to find with just that dot. Maybe I should come back to just a laser pointer. That'd probably be easier. And that's verifying the data types. And I've already talked about this as well because we want to determine how it acts. So those are Belinda's 3 rules. I also suggest that you change the columns to something that makes sense, but you always want to do those 3 things. Now, if you're using a data source like SQL, where you have control or ability to access the data source, I'd recommend that you create a view rather than a table, than accessing a table. And the reason for that is if the table changes for whatever reason, maybe the software you're using has an update and the table changes, then you're going to be significantly less likely breaking your Power BI reports than anything else. Also, if there's good governance in place, if it's a database that's being built, they're going to be looking to see what else in the SQL system or whatever you're using is affected by or is using that particular table so that they can, if there's a dependency on it, you have a better chance of being notified that, hey, something is likely to change or you may want to look at the view and go forth. So that's good. There's also going to be less data in it. As a general rule, not in the example I'm going to use today, but there's going to be less data in it. If there's less data in it, it's going to process a lot faster. It's going to refresh a lot faster. And then you also have the ability to do a lot of your modeling in the view instead of Power BI. Now, I know Power BI Query Editor and Power BI DAX offer so many cool and fun things that you're thinking, oh, I'll just do it in there. But that's going to slow down processing time because what's going to happen is it's going to have to go out and get the data. When it brings the data in, they're just going to have to go through all your applied steps. So if you could access that view and have a lot of the information already populated for you, you're going to be far better off as far as refreshing. And that's what it's really about. And then you could have fun doing other ID, extended cost, extended price, unit price. I do not need the customer information or the dates. I'll get that from the document. I'll keep the item class code. I'll keep the salesperson, but I don't need the state or the zip. And now I'm going to click OK. Now I'm down to just 10 columns for this particular visual. Now I might be linking on something to item number later, and I know I'm linking on the SOP number, and I might later also link on the salesperson ID. So I'm going to highlight the 3 of those, right mouse click, and choose to trim those. And so now this set of data only has the 10 columns in it. Now I'm going to go back to the last one, and I'm going to do customers. And on customers, basically it's going to end up being the same thing. So I'll grab this time the customer number, the address, city, state, class, customer name, and the salesperson, or the state and the zip, not the salesperson. Okay, so on this one, I have 7 columns. The customer number is something I might link on later, so I'm going to trim that. Now, I might have duplicates. In fact, I could see I have duplicates. I might have duplicates in everything. So I want to do, except the sales lines, because that's the most detailed one. So what I'm going to do is start with the customer, hold the shift key down, and select all the columns. Then I'll right mouse click, and I'll choose to remove duplicates. And I went from 796 rows to 69 rows. So I've significantly shrunk the size of my data set, even though the customer number is repeating, but it's only repeating for 69 rows instead of 969. Now the sales lines, we're going to keep those the same because that's the most detailed information we had. But I am going to also shrink this because you could see like this, here's an invoice, 3014 is listed, what, 5 or 6 times. So again, I'm going to come through and choose to remove duplicates, and I'll go from 976 to 630 rows. So I have shrunken the size of my data dramatically for each of these. And I was able to do so by creating all of these pieces of information. So now I have links, and I created these really cool dimensions. I could go a step further if I wanted to, and I could create a dimension between the item description and the item number, and that would even shrink it a little bit more if I wanted to do that. I'm not going to right now. You get the gist of it. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that the same. And I'm going to go ahead and click on close and apply. Now, when I do this, I now have 3 queries. And trust me, even with 3 queries, it does go through a whole lot faster. Yeah, if you had 3 separate views, it probably would be even still yet faster, but I still think for the most part, I would still do it like this. So let's go into our data modeling here. And now we have our 3 views, and it was able to do the automatic linking because the data type names were the same, and the types were the same, and the names were the same. And that was because of the advantage I had starting with cleaning up to the very minimum fields for everything, and then adding those back in, and that way the name stayed consistently across the list. One other thing I want to show you about doing relationships. Well, I don't want to skip ahead. I'm skipping ahead. Sorry about that. Okay, because that is in the next section there. We'll come back to it in a moment. But now I have these particular fields. One more thing you probably want to do to make it easier on Grandma. As I highlight this and I see the customer numbers, I should probably not have the customer number in 2 places. That would just confuse her. So I'm going to come over here to the customer number and select it, right mouse click, and choose to hide in report view. And now if you look closely, you will see I have the little eyeball with the line through it, which indicates that that's hidden in report view. It'll make sense for anything relating to the customer. I would come over to the customer card on the left. Likewise, I'd want to do the same thing for SOT number, but I'm going to do that over here this time on the lines. Just hide it from report view on the lines. Now, this is all fine and good, but we might be running into a situation where we might have some additional information that we want to do here. It's possible in this database inside of GP that we could have 2 lines with the same item on it. And the way I pulled the data out, it might get a little bit confused. Because if I came in and let me go back to transform data, I'm going to pull up one document particularly. Let me go. find the document number. It ends with 266. So if I come to the line item, and right now, if I were to look at SOP number 2262. All right, I'm just going to select this one. Right now, there's only one line on it. And what I'm going to quickly do is add a second line using the same item, but with a different unit cost. You could see the unit cost right there. And I don't want to confuse things. So let's see. Okay. So let me refresh the data real fast. Okay, now I have two lines. Now the problem with this is if I bring this over and I try to put something in with just like the item number and the rows, it might get a little bit confused because they're different cost here. Let's see, extended price, looking for unit cost, unit price, there we go. The unit price is very different for these. One is $1,780 and the other is $1,666.67. So the price is different. So we might want to go a little further and make sure we have this unique line item so things don't get a little bit mushed up. Now, to create a unique line item, if you know the GP database, we know we have something, and you don't need to know this, but we have something called the line item sequence, which is unique. So I'm going to add that in. There it is, line item sequence. And then, as I mentioned, if you have removed other columns again, the line item sequence will show up unchecked. So I'm going to go ahead and check it. So now I have this unique field. So I have line item sequence and I have my item number. Now I may choose to make a custom field using these two so that I have something unique to link on if I wanted to link on multiple tables at one time. Now you'll notice though the line item sequence is a whole number and the item number is a text field, and there's numbers in there, well, not item number, SOP number. There are letters in there, so we can't make it a numerical field. What I'm going to do is just go ahead and duplicate this column. Whoop, let me go to the end and do that. I'm going to duplicate this column. And here's my line item sequence. I'll move it over. And I'm going to make the line item sequence text. And now I could create this unique field. I'm going to highlight both of these just to be on the safe side, quickly come in and trim. And I'm going to select them in a particular order, SOP number and line item sequence. And then I'm going to merge these. And then I'm going to just call this my line number. So this is one way around it. So now I have this unique line number. And now if I do this on another set of data, so here I'm going to come back in. Let me go back to where I filtered the row right here. This is where I filtered it to just one invoice. Let me get rid of that. If I want to, I'm going to call this one sales line, let's call it sales invoice lines. And for here, I'm going to come in on this, not that one, I want SOP type. Where did it go? Did I get rid of it? Let's see. Oh, I never got it. Let me get it back. Okay. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to filter this to everything except return. And then I'm going to get rid of it. And remove column. Okay, so these are all of my all the kinds of documents that increase my balance, because in this particular case, I know returns, they're going to show up as positive numbers and they really should be negative. So I'm going to duplicate this. And on this one, I'm going to call this one return lines. Okay. Now I still have that cool a unique code that at the end, that line number. That's one way about it. But I also can come in and let me come over and do this filter, because this time I want it equals to return so that it only gives me the returns. And then that way I can make the quantity negative, and I could make the extended price and extended cost. I can make all of those negative at one time. Well, I guess I have to do them one at a time, but let's see. I'm going to highlight this one. I'm going to multiply it. I'm going to multiply it times a -1. A -1. And my quantity is also -1. Okay. So now I have these unique identifiers. So if I wanted to try to do any kind of linking from one line to the next, I have something unique. Let's say I have a line for common information. If I also link that by item number and line number, I can make a connection in relation to that, even though, you know, it's really different multiple fields. I guess that makes sense to everybody. If that doesn't make sense to someone, let me know. And I could, at this point, if I wanted to, go back and append these back together if I wanted to. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's pretty cool stuff. So let me come through and do that. I'm going to append these two together, the lines and the returns. So I'm going to come in and go back to home. Instead of clicking on append, because I don't want to just add here, I'm going to click on this drop down and append as new. And I have the option to do 2 or more tables or just one. And I'm just going to append these two together. They have all the same column names and all the same column types. So they'll end up as a brand new unique code. So now all I have to do is sales line items, rename it. Now for these two, I've duplicated my data set, and so I don't want them to be duplicate. I could hide them in the report mode and at least grandma wouldn't see it, but I'd still have duplicate data there. But if I right mouse click and uncheck enable load, you notice it goes to italicized, and that means it's going to be included in the refresh, but it's not going to load that extra data for me. And this is warning me that I had already been in report the Power BI designer already. So if I've used any fields in that from this table in a report, I'm going to lose that. So I'm just got that warning there. Now this is still a little junky to read. So what I may want to do is hide the ones that are used for refresh only so into a separate area. So I'm just going to right mouse click on this one. And I'm going to choose move to a group, and I'll choose new group. I could have just created the group and then moved it, but I'm going to call this one refresh only. And now I have this little group up here that shows me this is one that's refreshed. And I could just right mouse click and move this one, but I could also just come up and drag and drop it. Now I've organized I could just close that out and I can see now the queries that I'm using. So that's one way that we could do joins of data on multiple areas. And now we're going to see this is going to change. Yep, it changed to line items, but the link is still the same because we're just linking by SOP number on this. So this is a many to one relationship. You can see the asterisk for the many and the one for the one. And we also have that line number listed right there. And if we were to go and look at our data in the data mode, you're going to see we have the line number listed here as well. Another way to create something similar to the line number would be to just create another query altogether, another dimension query that allows us to create a link for it. I'm going to quickly go back to my slide deck for a moment. Okay. And this is one of the things that we just did. So we created a custom key, but there's another way we can create a custom key too for our dimensions if we are so inclined. So let's go ahead and do that other way right now. Oh, before we do that, let me show you the next thing also. When you're creating relationships, try to avoid many-to-many relationships. Try to create that table in the middle that gives you that lookup. That's what you really want to do. So now let's go back and go back to our data for a moment here. So what I'm going to do is go back into the query editor. And in this particular case, let's go to the sales lines right here. And we have this item description number right here. And let's say that this probably isn't a good example, but let's say that, actually, you know what? Let me go back and let me do salesperson. So we have the salesperson name or ID listed right here. Let's say we wanted to create an index for this, a unique index. Now I showed you one way here, but we could also create a unique index in another fashion. What I'm going to do, I have the salesperson from the sales transaction. Let me just rename this to salesperson. Okay, and I've already trimmed this up before I joined it together. What I'm going to do here is right mouse click, and I'm going to add this as a new query. So this query is referencing the salesperson in the sales line item. And the first thing I need to do is transform this list into a table, which gives me the option right there. So I'm going to click on that. And once I have it in, I have this table. Let me change the type to text, Belinda's rules, right? And then I'm also going to come in and change this to salesperson ID. Now, one of the things I want to do here is maybe change this so that, actually, before I change it, let me do this. I've got the salesperson ID here. Let me add in my sales information. Another thing, if you're going to add a lot of tables from something like SQL or added a lot of tables from the same source, you probably want to use a parameter to make it easier to continually connect. So I'm going to go right in this time to the table. Like I said, don't do, but I'm going to go ahead and do it and get the salesperson commission information and the salesperson's name. So I've got too many columns here. Let's do Belinda's 3 rules. I'm going to call the salespeople. And then what I'll do now is remove unnecessary columns. And the only thing I want is the salesperson ID, the first name, the last name, and the commission percent. All right, got all that. I'm going to trim all of these because I might need to do a link on them, and I'm definitely going to do a merge on one. So I'll go to transform trim. I'm going to put these two together to give me a name. So I'll call this sales person. And I'll separate it by a space. And then this is commission percent. So let me change the format to commission percent. And because of the way the data is stored, the commission percent is 3%, but it's looking like 30,000. So I want to do a transform here and divide it by 10,000. It is not uncommon to have to divide by 10,000, 100, 1,000, depending on how the database is stored. And then I have my salesperson ID field. Okay, this looks good. What I want to do is merge this information in with the salesperson ID here. But one of the things you're going to notice is we have a lot of duplicates here. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove duplicates. And I'm going to come in under home and do a merge. And I'll merge this in with my salespeople down here. Not really necessary. I probably could just use the same list because it is the same list, but why not, right? So I've got the salespeople listed right here. And I'm going to choose salesperson and salesperson. And I'll go ahead and select all that. I get my table column with my double-headed arrow. When I open that, I'm going to choose to expand. I don't want the column name first. I don't want it to be called salesperson dot whatever. So I don't need the salesperson ID again. I already have that. So now it's all expanded. This one, I only going to use it for refresh. So I'll remove the enable load. And actually, before I do that, let's come in and, oh yeah. Dun, dun, dun. Let me go back a step. Let me right here, because this is showing me all my salespeople. I'm going to come in and add a column, and I'm going to add an index column. And I can add either starting with a 0 or starting with a 1, or I could choose custom. Custom would tell me which one I could start with and what I want to increment by. I'm just going to use 1, and I'm going to call this salesperson index. Okay. So now if I come back up, it's a bit redundant for me to merge, but I want you to see merge just in case you guys have not used it before. And I don't want the salesperson ID again, but I want everything else. Cool. I'm going to drag my salesperson index to the very beginning. Or maybe I'll keep it at the end.
Belinda, I think it's because you got the 3 columns selected.
Yeah,
Oh,
click off
thank
the 3
you.
columns. There you go.
Thank you. Okay. Got that done. Actually, so now that I have this, what I'm going to do is come up to my sales line items, and I'm going to merge again. So that one merge was just for fun, but at least you got to see me create a query or something. And so I'm going to just click on merge again. And I'm going to choose salespeople ID. And I'm going to find the salesperson here and the salesperson ID here. And they should all match. Okay, cool. And I'm going to click OK. But this time, I'm only going to keep the index. Now what I could do is remove the salesperson ID here. That's going to be a little bit smaller in space. So I have my salespeople here. Let me move this one up there. So now I have still yet another dimension table for the salesperson. So that is another way that you could add this really kind of cool index capabilities just by populating it in. All right. And so, and that connected properly. And we are close to me asking you guys, or wrapping it up to the end. So some resources for DAX, we're almost done, one, I also want to point out, and I'll show you guys how to do this in just a moment, but when you create measures in anything in DAX, you probably should put them in their own display folder for grandma so that you can have all the calculations put together. And I do want to point out, one reason you might want to use DAX is you might want to create a DAX measure for every single numerical column. And the reason for that, anything you would sum, and the reason for that is if you decide you want to do analyze in Excel from the service in the cloud, if you do that, then you're going to need to have DAX measures. If you try to, like if you have sales there, that is just a regular sales, that sales number is not going to show up in, or it's not going to work as a numerical value. It's going to show up like text. So only measures will show up as number if you happen to choose that one. There's also a great video on another relatively new feature over the past couple months, calculation groups. that have to do with DAX. That's pretty cool. Marco Russo does that one. I told you I would tell you what Marco says. Marco says, when you're creating relationships, if you try to use a bidirectional relationship, and never do that unless you really know what you're doing. He always says, if you use bidirectional, you're going to go to hell. So I just wanted to warn you that it's torturous. And so that's my Marco one. And there's also a great DAX studio and a Veripack analyzer. Actually, behind the scenes and doing a lot of this work in Power BI is a Veripack engine. And so you can get access to them by going to the SQL BI tools. Okay, so before I get on my soapbox, let's come back in for just a moment. And we basically have something that we could use. I had it pulled up already, but you know what? We'll just resave this. Save as, and we'll call this with modeling. Okay, so this is basically our data modeling. It, for the most part, is done. Perhaps we want to add DAX in. So let me add a little bit of DAX in just so we can say we have some. So stretch that out. I'm going to take the extended price, which is our total sales, and I'm going to create DAX here. So create a new measure. So I'm just talking the simple stuff, nothing complex. We'll call this total sales. And the total sales, we're just going to do a sum. That's how we're aggregating it. And I'm going to do it on this extended price field, ending parentheses. That's our whole measure. And so now what I may want to do is I may want this extended price not to show up anymore. So I might want to click on that and hide it so it doesn't confuse grandma. But maybe we want all of our measures to show up in the same place. So what we're going to do here is go to our modeling view. And if I can get down here, I don't know where I put that. Where did that show up? It would help if I got out of that mode. There it is, total sales. Oh, actually, let me do a little quick upgrade here so you can see it in the new things. All right, so we have total sales listed right there. I'm going to select this, and you can see the extended price is dimmed out. And then over here on the right, there's this display folder, and I'm going to call this measures. And I don't want it hidden, so I'm going to leave it set to no. And when I do that, when I go back over to my data here, I now have this folder inside of my query here, my sales line tables, with the measure folder or display folder where I could put them all together so I'm not overwhelming anybody. Okay, got that done. Let's save again, and I'm going to publish this to my data model in Power BI. Publish. And data sets, and I'll choose select. So I have a work group out there for data sets, fun with modeling PBI. Now when this is done, I'm going to just open up a new blank report. And show you how you can connect to your data using a Power BI data set. Then I want to show you one more thing on a modeling page, and then I'll get on Belinda's soapbox. Then I'll be done because I can just show you with a screenshot my soapbox. Okay, so I have no data out here. This is the other one. Now I could either come in and under data, there's this new option called data sets, or I could find it by going to get data, and then go to Power Platform and choose Get Data Sets here. You cannot connect to data sets if you've connected to anything else. So I'm using one data set to connect to for this particular report that already exists. So if I find my workspace, which I just saw data sets, fun with modeling, I'm going to go ahead and create a report using that data set. And watch over here on the right, it's got all the modeling done for me, including the relationships being set up for me as well. And if I go back over, you notice I don't have that data view because that's one of the things you do not get with when you're doing a direct connection, which is essentially what I'm doing here. But if I go into my line mode, I should still have my display folder with my measure in it. So it keeps everything nice and neat. And the cool thing is if you have 10 different people using 10 different their own reports using the same data set, you only have one data silo that you need to account for at that particular time, which is pretty cool, I think. So I'm going to just come in and show I got stuff in here. Choose item numbers and total sales. So pretty nifty, I think. The last thing I want to show you is what happens if your data modeling ends up looking like this. And this is actually a real report on something I am working on. We'll go and upgrade. And it looks a bit messy. So when we're trying to do some verification of how things are laid out, how can we make life simple for us? Well, one thing a lot of people never pay attention to is there's another way you could click on a new layout here. That one's looking at all tables, but this one's only looking at whatever I tell it to look at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and grab my fact table called purchase orders and drag it out. And here it is. Now, if I only want to see what's related to it, if I come back over here, you can see I've got lots of things related to it. What I could do is right mouse click in this area and choose add related tables. Now I'm only looking at things that are related to my purchase order. Now you don't want to change this layout, but it makes it easier for you to see. Now I have this one laid out to show people in a traditional star approach, but this is normally how I would lay it out. So I can see, and I'd probably stretch them across a little bit more even. But this is typically how I would do this. And so here are all of my dimensions being placed up at the top with my fact down below. And I could easily see the relationship for each one and hover over it and get information from it accordingly. Now, you don't want to come in and delete this, because if you do, if I choose delete, I'm going to be undoing the layout for this table. So watch what happens if I click delete and I come back in here. Oh, no, I didn't delete it here. Okay, never mind. I think that was something that might have just been an older version where that was still not working right. Okay, so anyhow, a lot of people don't have that, don't use that layout enough. I think that's pretty cool. So let me get to my soapbox, and then I'll take any other last questions that people might have. And let me go back to the current slide here. And my soapbox has to do with another part of the Power Platform, Power Automate, where you create flows. And a flow basically is going to be where something happens that causes a chain of events. So whatever happens in flow is a trigger, right? Maybe the trigger is, in the case of Power BI, in the Power BI service, you can create alerts where if sales go over a certain dollar amount, or AR goes over a certain dollar amount, or cash goes below a certain dollar amount, you can get an alert emailed to you and you see the button there. But the fact that that alert happens can set off a trigger in Power Automate. And then you could list a whole chain of actions that occur as a result of that trigger. So we have an invoice that is greater than our average invoice amount. So it could automatically go, oh, wait a minute. There's an invoice that happened above our greatest invoice amount. Our largest invoice of the day is greater than our average. So I'm going to send everybody in the company an email saying, hey, congratulate Steve. He had this really big invoice right here. So I'm super excited about that. And so that's the kind of thing that an alert can do. Well, one of the other things an alert can do is it can also do a refresh on your data set inside of Power BI service. And so in this particular one, I have it set as a manual trigger where I could go in and update the workspace and then choose my particular data set. So let's see if this is going to happen. And let's try to build this out, because that takes me to the end of my slides. So I have this set up where it is pulling from that particular data set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's see. I've got this dollar amount listed here. So let me pull up that invoice that I changed lines on earlier. And once I get it pulled up, I'll bring it into, okay. So if you guys don't know GP, this is GP. All right, so it's set, this is a $215,000 invoice, or basically the line items are 200,000. So if I delete this, I expect this to drop by roughly 201,000. So what I'm going to do is come into the action and delete this. Okay, now let me go into Power BI here. I'm going to change this to look at my data set. Come on. Not sure why that one is not only showing me demos and not my data set. One way around it. Let's delete it and re-add it. Okay, I just added those in today. So I'm going to look for the action. The trigger in this case is going to be a manual button, but I have all these different actions I could do. If I have a data set in Power BI, I could add rows to that data set. I could export a file to paginated reports. That's in preview. Woo. Let's go to refresh the data set. And there's my data set. Select an item, fun with modeling. That's the data set we just created. So I'm going to save this, close it out, and let's cross our fingers it works. Let me find my phone. I'm going to open up Flow on my phone, or Power Automate on my phone. And if you could see my screen, I have, or my picture, I have a button option on my phone because I told it to create a button. I'm going to press that button. There we go. And any minute we should see on my screen share it running. Oh, there it is. 6 seconds ago, 30 milliseconds. That does not look like it was fast enough. So I'm not sure if it did the refresh or not. Let's go in and see if we can figure that out. Oh, not demo data sets. We had it in data sets. Oh, looked like I had, oh, I might have had to oh, I don't have my gateway on. It would have updated it. I don't have my gateway on because I was doing a local SQL. Anyhow, yeah, so this is an error message, something I couldn't connect because I didn't have my gateway on. But anyhow, it's pretty cool that you could do that, as you guys could see. So that's just one example of fun stuff. Did someone have a question on that one?
No questions in the chat. Speak up now.
Yeah, I have a question. I was trying to chat. The Power Automate feature to trigger an alert, how do you implement something like that? So, I mean, you just did a manual refresh, right, by selecting the Automate as a trigger. I'm just curious how that works.
Okay, that's a great question. And let me,
I'm sorry if it's going to take a while. I just
no, that's okay. I just shut the wrong thing down. Let me end the show real fast. Okay, so let me build one out from scratch inside of Power Automate. Here we go. So what you would typically do, so some people will say, all right, well, you know what, let me just delete this. Let me turn on my gateway. I think the refresh is one of the cooler options that we have for using this. But it's not the only one. But the fact that you can then go beyond the 8 times a day, pretty cool.
That is pretty, yeah, that's really cool, because we have some users that do some data stewardship, so they may update some data. They have to wait for us wait for this, the scheduled refresh. So it'd be good to maybe empower them to do that.
Yeah.
Without premium, you're still limited to 48, right?
The number of
Refreshes
flows,
a day. Mm-hmm.
refreshes. Yeah, it's well, it depends. Well, depending on the kind of data you're refreshing on, you could end up with. Let's see. I think it's still okay. Sometimes the login is on a different screen. So this is why I'm looking around kind of frantically going, where is it? Okay. Yeah, so it's going to vary depending on what you connect to. If you're trying to connect using a gateway, you're going to be able to, I believe you're going to be able to do it for free. If you're trying to connect to something like Business Central, then you need to have a premium connector. So there it is. Okay. So depending on what you're doing, you could end up having to have a different need for it. But I also want to point out there's a newer version you might have heard about Project Oakdale. And Project Oakdale, if you use Microsoft Teams, is giving you the ability to do some flows inside of Teams along with Power Apps that are included in the price. So you get a lot of flows there, more than normal. So that's something you want to check into if this is something that is interesting to you. Okay, got that done. So let me come in here to my data and come into my settings and connect this with my gateway. Go to gateway connections. There's BusyBee and apply. Okay, got that. And then, all right. So this should allow me to, this should take control and work for me. All right. So let's build this out. Okay, so what we're going to do, I'm going to just come up and click on new. And there, I could either have it something automated or something else. So for example, let's say that if you are managing quotes and you are using Business Central, let's say, if somebody enters in a quote for Business Central, you could have the fact that that quote got entered be a trigger. And every time that quote gets entered, it refreshes the data set. And so that way you don't have to worry about how many times a day it refreshes. It's going to refresh every time that happens. Or if something, maybe you have a flow set up where somebody does something and it updates a SharePoint list, then the SharePoint list could kick off what's next. In this particular case, I'm going to choose instant so that I could choose a flow button, or I could make it something in Power Apps, for example. So I'm going to manually create that, and we'll call this Green Bay. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click on create. So that's my flow. And if I want to, I could add an input value on it if I needed that for whatever reason, but I don't need one here. I do that a lot if I'm trying to back up a SQL database, for example. I might put in a field where someone can manually enter in the name of the SQL database so that I can have the opportunity to just back up a single database. I'm going to click on next. And I'm going to, so that's my trigger. And now I can have one trigger in a flow and I can have as many actions as I want. So I'm going to look up actions for Power BI. And when you look up one, there's a trigger list. So the only trigger that it does by itself is that data alert, but there are additional actions. So we could then go through and do a refresh on a data set. So we first choose our workspace. There's my data set workspace. And then we choose a data set, and I'm going to choose that fun with modeling. Now, if I wanted to, I could continue on by adding in another step, and the other step could be an email. So I'm going to send an email, and the message ID could be data refreshed. And, oh, that's get email, not send email. Well, I'm not going to go through it, but you could see, I could keep going down the list, and this is real minimal stuff here. And I could have it say, send an email. And, I feel like I misspelled that. I I have multiple emails, so just typing in my name doesn't always work for me. Okay, and the subject could be data refreshed. And maybe I want to be real specific about what data was refreshed, so I can come in and say, all right, wrong one. Oh, not a lot there. Okay. So maybe, yeah, because I don't have anything from the trigger that I pulled in yet. So I'm not going to worry about that then. Okay. We'll just repeat it. All right. And then save. So now we have this whole, which one? The provided flow display name. Oh, it's got to be at least 3 characters long. Okay. GB refresh. And now we'll save. Okay, so now this is done. I'm going to go back and verify it's turned on. It is turned on. So now if I were to go back in and run my flow, I'm going to just click on run here. Let's see if we get it this time. Yeah, it's warning me I have to have permissions using that ID to certain things. I'll go ahead and click on run flow. This one's running. And it looks like it all ran successfully. It looks a little fast, so not sure if that took or not. Could be a little hard to tell now that I did that. All right, well, I've got something going wrong. So forget the fact that it's going wrong. That is usually Belinda when I'm trying to build something out. But this is essentially how the flows get set up. So it's not very difficult to do. I'm just missing something on my data connection. That's all. So this is
thanks for sharing. That's I just wanted to see the process. It's great.
Yeah. It's pretty simple and straightforward. I mean, one of the things I could show you just to give you one that's a little bit longer is well, this one's not longer, but it's still nonetheless interesting. If I open up this one, when I click a button, it manually triggers a stored procedure, and it goes into my SQL Server and then does a backup of all of my databases for me. And so that one's a little bit longer. And then I have, here's another one. I don't have that many in here, but this one, so in Power Apps, when I tell Power Apps to launch this one, it goes in, I have a list of party questions in SharePoint. It goes out and it gets the party question list. And then what it does is okay, for the value, I want you to update every item so that the question has not been asked. And so that way, as I ask a question in the Power App, it turns it from unasked to asked, so it no longer appears in my list. And then if I'm done with the party, I want to refresh everything so that the list comes back. That's kind of how that works. That one was done as an example, not because I'm really into into doing parties. Let's see. Yeah, I don't have that many in here, but you can see, I mean, it's kind of cool and very, very simple how a lot of these things work. I don't think, yeah, that one's not doing much either. Okay. Yeah, so very simple, very clean. Again, I had in the chat already this bit.ly, and it is case sensitive, / more from Belinda. If you want any of the data sets that I have for you, or any of the data, anything that I've given that you, besides the slide deck, which I've already uploaded, if you want anything else, you could just reach out to me either using that form or my Twitter or my email. But that is a little bit. Did anyone learn anything? This is for me because this is a whole new idea, new concept. And I want to see if anyone learned anything that they didn't know before that would make me feel better, that this looks like I was on the mark.
This is the point where we unmute, maybe even
Yes.
turn on a webcam and start giving Belinda our feedback.
Yeah, Belinda,
learning.
I'll give my feedback because, I mean, I've done a lot of those things. I did some of the things with the append and merge. I've only done a few times. So it was really good to see how you went through and actually, normalize the denormalized table and how that worked. And I think some of the things we've been doing with the presentation and the modeling, but there's a lot of good things that, came out of it. So with I haven't really used in the modeling section to do the views or the related tables, so because we have some large, messy relationships. So that was useful. A lot of good things. So
Thank you.
very nice presentation. Yeah.
Isn't it crazy how those 3 examples of the data sizes I gave you, I mean, it all started ultimately with exactly the same view. And just how much smaller it got and easier for the end user. I mean, it just is astounding what you can do when you do that. And then, it makes all those other tools so much easier to use as well. So thank you for that. Yeah, I'm not looking for kudos. I'm looking for, I wish it would have had, or this is something I didn't know that would be area I should probably expand on.
Nice. Anyone else? Type it in the chat if you can't unmute, but now's the time to unmute and turn on your webcam.
Well, Belinda, I realize now, and I'd really never pursued it very much, but you were making composite keys in your data modeling, and it makes perfect sense. It just never surfaced to the top of brain that would be an effective way to do to make connections between tables that have multiple keys each. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that one was just for you, but because you had asked about that for me to show that, and so I mean, it's not hard to do, and those keys are always going to be unique because of the way the data is coming in. So you don't have to worry about that uniqueness, or by doing the way. I mean, you could always go through and add the index, and that's certainly a way, like I showed you that, but my preference for a lot of things is using your terminology, because Belinda talks citizen developer. We're like, we just mushed 2 things together. So yeah, a composite of 2 particular columns that offer that uniqueness, and that gives you the ability to create relationships because you only could do that one column for relationships. Or even if you're doing merges and so forth, that one relationship to create for merging or appending, or well, not appending, but merging. So it gives you the ability to create something that's very unique and very specific. And if it did change, it's because ultimately, for some reason, the data source changed.
And Paul put together a quick survey. You want to say something about that, Paul?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. You put it in the chat. We got a quick survey so we know how we're doing reaching and people are learning about the group. So go back through the chat there. There's a link to a quick survey, monkey survey I've put together before if you're heading out. If you're not, this is the part where we turn on our webcams. And there is a question in the chat. Wallow's too shy to turn on his webcam and ask it, so I will ask it for him. The layout to see only specific tables and related tables was new to him. So you like that?
Yeah, and that's kind of a cool thing when you have a lot of data modeling going on, because it gives you the opportunity to focus in on something without having to move around a lot, see how your relationships are set up. So that is a really good tool to use when you're doing some modeling and thing. And you're right. And Wallow, you're exactly right. I mean, a lot of people don't know it exists, and they never paid attention to the fact that there is that another option down there to do that. Because, I mean, your first thought might be, well, why would I want that? But if you have a lot of relationships, particularly if you have a lot of stars going on in the same data model, then you could put them all together. Is anybody already publishing data sets to the service and using them from the service? Yes?
Okay. Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had a question. I had a question around data sets, because we have some power users actually using data sets, and they want to link to other models. And I think that's a new feature coming. Is that available yet? The drawing on 2 data sets?
Right now, it's just one data set that you would
Okay.
have out there.
Right.
Yeah,
I
they've
haven't.
talked about it at Ignite, where they were like, in the future, we'll allow two data sets in one Power BI report and join across two data sets. And that's like, whoa, really? How's that going to
Yeah,
work?
yeah.
Oh,
I've got a question there. Wallow, he's saying, did you use duplicate versus reference for a reason?
Yes. The reason I used duplicate versus reference was because I wanted to completely remove the column from where I started out. I said, okay, I'm going to add all the columns I want. Then I'm going to duplicate it because I'm going to go back and just flat out remove from that original source all the columns that I wanted. Now, I could have probably kept it out there and made it refresh only, but I find it to be just a lot less confusing and a little more efficient to do that. When you reference it, if you go back and delete a column that you're needing as part of your reference, it becomes deleted. So you're going to end up with a bit of a mess. So that was why I chose to duplicate instead of reference. I do like referencing, but I tend to keep my referencing a little bit on the lower side. Yep. Cool.
so when you you had 4 tables, so and it wasn't a star breakout. Is that? I mean, sometimes you have levels where like a customer will have contacts, but you're bringing it down to the to like the invoice customer contacts, and how do you deal with that? Are there performance issues and sometimes there's multiple relationships with entities. I know. I guess what's a good way to deal with that, and just I know you can have the inactive relationships, but typically only one relationship between the entities. Or is there a good way to deal with that?
So let me make sure I understand what you're asking. So if you have like contact information inside of your customer, would you separate that out into a separate dimension as well?
Yeah, it's probably not a good example, but it's an example.
Yeah, I get that. It depends how much information there is in the contact. So if, let's say, you had an address for a customer and then you had a contact and you had additional information for just that contact, I would cut down the fields by separating those out, because what you would end up with, for example, is if by chance you had a customer with 2 contacts, now you have 2 customer records to account for each contact after you normalize the data. So in that case, I'm like, oh, I would definitely want to move the contact out. Or if they both have addresses, I would probably want to separate out the address or separate them into separate categories. So it really depends upon what the data is. So if I was looking at, let's say I was looking at items that I'm invoicing, and I use sales and invoicing a lot because everybody has to collect revenue for their company, no matter how they collect it or what it's called when they collect it. Sales, funding, it doesn't matter what it is. Okay, so if you have inventory items, for example, and right now we only have like maybe the inventory description on there, or maybe a classification. So in that case, I would probably keep them all together. But if we have a lot of additional information, maybe we had some kind of category, and in the category, it would be like, if this is finished goods, then I know that it's going to have another field or 2 related to finished goods. And if it's raw materials, I'm going to have another related to raw materials. I would probably then say, okay, let's break it out a little bit more into more dimensions. So probably easier said that. I mean, sometimes you can get carried away. I mean, if you end up creating too many dimensions and the only thing you have in there is the key and the one field, then maybe you don't want to do that, right? If there's a lot of duplication of that in a field, then yes, bring it out and do it. I would go after it as, okay, I'm going to create a dimension for everything I could possibly create a dimension for. But if I'm looking at it like creating a customer name in the customer ID field, I mean, that would be ridiculous because it would have the same number of records.
Right.
And so that one would be a little bit nutso. And even though like a city maybe repeat multiple times, it's still, you don't want to do that because you would just be creating a dimension for a city for no possible reason. You'd still have to have some index for it. So, but that being said, if you had customers and you had like a sales territory, which is being repeated, yeah, you might want to break it out even if the only thing in there is a sales territory and maybe put an index with it. You might want to, but I mean, I would kind of leave that one.
Would you put on the fact table the ID then?
Mm-hmm.
So it wouldn't be layered out. It would just be
Yeah.
starred.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
it feels like it would be more duplicated, but if you have like an index number associated with it, then like I showed you in that one particular clip or piece, then you are really optimizing your data set a lot more because those numbers are, when you use an index number like that, it's pretty efficient. And
Okay.
so you're creating a little bit of extra efficiency by doing that.
Kelly, I'm going to make you
Thank you.
ask Wallow's question.
Mhm.
Kelly.
Thank you much.
Geez, Wallow, just turn your video on. He's wondering if you normally use your own calendar.
Oh, yeah, good question. And I think I skipped over a whole piece of my slide deck about that. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Okay, so let me go back and I'm not going to share it, but let me find my. That's a great question. Now, I can't believe I just skipped over it. I had a whole little section on dates in there, and I somehow, did I delete it? I must have deleted it. Okay, here's the thing on dates. There is a way that you do not have to go through and create a separate date calendar. It will, there's a feature set up inside, and I can't believe, because this is pretty important, I can't believe that I left that off. If you do that, let me collapse all of them.
Should we be seeing something?
Do what?
Check. Everybody seeing something?
Oh, no, I'm not sharing. I'm not going to
Okay.
share. Yeah, okay.
All right.
All right, so there is a global setting. I just want to make sure I have the exact setting name called auto date time for new files. You want to make sure you have that turned off so that by default any new file you create doesn't try to create a date hierarchy. If you're looking at data like we have here, like we were looking at today where we only had one date, then you might want to turn it on for that one table. And then that way you could still do time intelligence without having to have a date table because there's only one date in the whole data set. If you have, oh no, that's not true. I had two dates. So it would actually, it might create some issues with that depending on the size of the data set, it was pretty small. I'd probably still keep it. It's going to try to create a whole data hierarchy for time intelligence for every date it sees in the data set. So if you have a decent data set size and, less than 1,000 records is really tiny. If I had a normal data set, if I had a couple million records and I had those two dates in there, I would create my own date table, probably using DAX, or a lot of times I'll use M. But I would create my own date table. And the reason for that would be because I only wanted to create all that hierarchical, that's a word I can't say, you know what I mean. That information for one date, and that would be the date in my date table. And it would be a lot easier. So as a rule, I say add a date table in and turn that feature off. However, if there's only one date table and it's pretty small, no need to add a whole calendar in to do the load, because you could still do time intelligence features off of the that date table that's built in automatically. Does that make sense to everybody? I saw Pod nodding. I know he got that one. Okay, yeah, because he agrees. He probably experienced slowdown when they added that new feature, and they thought, oh, this is really cool. Everybody's going to need it. Everybody's going to want it, and everybody went to a grinding halt. And so they are like, okay, let's turn it off, turn it off, turn it off. But yes, I like having my own date table. And if I'm looking at accounting data, I will tend to try to find the fiscal year setup information and connect to it and build a date table in Query Editor using M, using things like Lisp. Otherwise, I'll create my date table using DAX. So that was an excellent question. Thank you for asking that.
Can you set a date field as a hierarchical field, like using the Power BI, like manually, just doing a single one?
Yes, you can actually. And what you would do there is the same way you would set up a date table one. You would go through in the data mode and highlight that particular date field and or that table where the date is stored, and then you would go in and mark it as the date table and set it up accordingly. You could also right mouse click on it in the field list if you want to and mark it as a date table. Mm-hmm.
I said I can set it my table fine, but actually setting the field as a hierarchical, the actual date field to do the automatic, you can right click that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yep.
all right. I must have just missed that. Okay.
Yeah. And then mark it as the date table. Then you pick the field. It'll go through some date verification for you. But now, again, I mean, it might give you an error message depending upon uniqueness of it. And I don't know what Steve is searching on, but
I was giving
I've
Pam
got
a hard
everybody
time.
in the all together mode, by the way. So you're sitting in an auditorium. So I like that feature. But yes, so yeah, there are some limitations to what you can make a date mark as a date table and which one you can't. But you could definitely do that.
All right.
Uh-huh. And if you do not have a date table set up and you try to use a date table there, you're going to want to use the quick measures to create some of that time intelligence feature. And Wallow had proclaimed that he loved the quick measures earlier in the chat, and I mentioned to him, and I'll mention to all of you, Microsoft is always looking for ideas on what to put in quick measures. So if you have one, by all means, go and put it in ideas. And if you're not comfortable with that, you can give it to Paul or Steve, or even send it to me, and we'll get it in ideas for you. Yeah. Because I love quick measures too.
Nice. Any other questions?
I apologize. I got to run. I got to pick up the kids in 10 minutes. So thank you so much.
So long,
Okay.
Greg.
Bye.
Yeah, so long,
Bye.
Greg. You can have a great night. You had your webcam on the entire time. You're good to go.
I do have one
Nice.
question, I guess, that I was a little confused about the appending of the returns. You actually split it up, you
Yeah.
appended those together, and then you did a calculation against the returns to,
Right.
to make it negative versus positive.
Right.
Couldn't you have done that with a calculation on?
I could have.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I wasn't like, I was like, why? I've used the pen quite a bit, a few times, but it's good to see it in action. In that
Yep,
case, I was a little bit confused. I'm like, well, it seems like a lot of work to.
I could have. I
Okay,
absolutely could have.
Okay.
And I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because the fact that I used a text field as if it doesn't equal return, or if it equals return, do this or that. Normally, I would try to find the table with the integer, and I would or the field with the integer. So if I was looking at a view, I would want to get the integer itself. In some applications, they allow you to change the text name. So if you use something like return and your application allows that to be changed, and someone goes in and says, these aren't returns, these are just credits, and they change it to credits, then you've broken so I try to go and find the part of the code that's hard-coded that they can't change. Usually that's something like an integer.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Cool.
Excellent.
Yeah, this was a fun one because it's like all about making things faster. And so making them better, make your data smaller. I'm one of those weirdos that will literally like do something, save it with a new name, and then compare the size. It's like.
Have you had any experiences? I was listening to a podcast on Power BI, and one of the things, if you're having one of the issues of performance, they actually said you could start taking advantage of the drill through and say, fine, one report data set is got a lot more details. It's the one that takes a long time to refresh. And a completely different report is much more of a summary, and the visuals in it are much more summarized. And that way you're kind of getting people to only go to the details and drill through when they need them, and putting pressure on your systems that way. Do you see that much yet?
I haven't had a need for that because of the customers I've dealt with. Their data size wasn't so huge that I've had a need for that. I mean, I've had quite a few that have over a gig of data in a single data set, but after everything is modeled and trimmed down, that is. So it's but I haven't really had the need to do that yet. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks.
And for people who are running into that kind of issue, I don't know a lot of the details, but they're making some changes to premium. So
they seem to be very enamored with their new premium per user as a performance boost and a whole new way of looking at premium.
Because, there are features in premium that you can't get in pro, but mostly that's because there has to be some differentiation between the product. But premium is not really about features, or it wasn't established about features. It was established about data size and space. That's what the difference was. And so that's a perfect example of why you would want to consider going premium. Yeah.
Sure. Nice. Any other burning questions or thoughts? Any shares? Anything for the group? Or any feedback on our user group? So I think we had great turnouts. We had even every time we do this online, more and more people turn their webcam on. Helps to get that feel back that we were missing when we were able to network in person. Hopefully people are paying attention to who's on the participant list and connecting with others in this user group community. And repeat visitors. That's great. Get the next one in January on your calendars. And take December off and enjoy December how we can, since we're not getting together for that.
Yeah. Well, Belinda, thank you from all of us. Not as many people left as we had at the beginning, but
I scared them off.
You're a wonderful presenter, and I'd say that you win the award for being the most popular presenter at the Green Bay Power BI user group. A little silent applause. Now, everybody turn on your microphones and applaud. Everybody turn on your microphones. Come on.
You made my day. November's been a tough month, and we all have much tougher months, I think, coming ahead of us. So, thank you for that. So, yeah, I've been trying to be kind to people, extra kind, and I find it's been making me feel good. But that makes me feel all warm and fuzzy. And you guys are great. I enjoy your groups a lot.
Thank you very much. All right, Toastmaster, do you want to toast us out of our meeting?
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Go do that survey. Do not close this window until you find that survey link so we can get some idea how things are going. And everybody have a fantastic evening. See everybody later.
Thanks. See ya.